As tensions between the United States and Iran continue to simmer, the White House's national security team went to Capitol Hill earlier to brief members of Congress on the current state of affairs in the impasse. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is here to tell us how that went. Good evening, Kristen.
Good evening, Shannon. Top Trump administration officials told members of Congress today that the intel on Iranian aggression was solid and that their decision to deploy U.S. military assets to the region has worked. But Democrats remain deeply skeptical about all of it.
That intelligence is borne out in attacks, and I would say it's also deterred attacks. We have deterred attacks based on our reposturing of assets, deterred attacks against American forces.
Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan defending the administration's strategy in Iran during closed-door briefings with the House and Senate. Republicans characterized it as a good briefing and say the administration's actions are totally appropriate.
They explained to us how the Iranian threat streams were different than in the past, that the attack on the ships and the pipeline was coordinated and directed by the Iranian government.
There was specific, credible evidence of a malign interest on the part of Iran.
Our actions over the last 2 weeks have been defensive.
But Democrats say the briefing from Shanahan, the Secretary of State, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was inadequate and did little to diminish their fears that the Trump administration may try to take military action against Iran without coming to Congress first.
I worry very much that intentionally or unintentionally, we can create a situation in which a war will take place.
This briefing was all about tactics, not about strategy. And that's been our worry from the beginning, that this is blind escalation with the hope that the Iranians will come to the table.
Make no mistake. This president and his administration are itching for a confrontation with Iran.
But Secretary Shanahan insists that's not true. He says the Pentagon is simply playing defense.
Our biggest focus at this point is to prevent Iranian miscalculation. We do not want the situation to escalate. This is about deterrence, not about war.
Problem is, Iran says it, too, is simply playing defense. And tonight, Iran's foreign minister said that the United States is playing a very dangerous game. Shannon?
Kristen Fisher, thank you very much. Okay, so dueling briefings and new bluster from Iran. Let's try to clear up some of the confusion with former CIA station chief and Fox News contributor Daniel Hoffman. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Okay, so I thought it was very interesting that the Democrats, some of them had a separate briefing by former Obama administration officials, John Brennan and Wendy Sherman, who was with the State Department. They obviously had high-level involvement with the Iran nuclear deal, which this president has now walked away from. Interesting to me, did it strike you as odd that there was a briefing from the former administration and then, of course, Trump administration officials today as well?
I mean, of all the people to invite, John Brennan, who speculated wrongly that the president criminally conspired with Russia and that he was guilty of treason. I mean, if you want to bring partisanship to a new and unhelpful level, invite him. I think they would have done better to invite my former colleague, Norm Rule, who was the National Intelligence Manager for Iran for the better part of almost a decade. He's nonpartisan, he knows the issues well, and I think he would have done far better than John Brennan at keeping this briefing focused on what matters, which is understanding the threat from Iran and how strategically we can deter it.
Okay, I want to put up a tweet here from Senator Chris Murphy. You heard him in Kristen's story there. He said this today in a tweet. He says, if our maximum pressure campaign against Iran is making them less willing to talk and our military deterrence campaign is causing them to increase attacks and threats, then that sounds like our plan isn't working.
He's got it reversed. It was Iran who started threatening us. It was Iran who threatened to enrich uranium to weapons-grade levels if they didn't receive from redress from sanctions in 60 days. Iran threatened to halt collaboration with Europe to stem the flow of drugs and migrants from the Middle East to Europe. And then they threatened us with kinetic action in the Middle East. And they've done this before. Remember, they tried to assassinate the Saudi ambassador here in the United States. They have proxy militias all over the Middle East who have targeted our people. So It's Iran who threatened us, and our measure of deterrence, which was to send the USS Abraham Lincoln and B-52 bombers and make a very clear statement that if we're attacked, whether by Iranian proxies or Iran itself, we will respond. That's deterrence, and that's how we prevent an Iranian miscalculation.
I want to read something, a CNN opinion piece, Aaron David Miller and Richard Sokolsky. And Aaron David Miller has been on our air many times. He writes this and says, when it comes to Iran, Jerusalem and Riyadh are hardly objective observers. While both would be at risk in a U.S. war with Iran, they've consistently advocated hardline U.S. policies. That's precisely why the U.S. should reject their advice. We should not follow Israeli and Saudi policies that raise risks of war with Iran, especially since their interests don't always align with our own. What do you make of that analysis?
Unhelpful. They're both our allies. We have extraordinary close partnerships with both of those countries, including intelligence exchanges that have saved the lives of thousands of Americans. I'm just not sure I see the value of that. And I also think that this is our policy. Let's be clear about this. This is the Trump administration policy. Maximum economic pressure on Iran. It's causing them a lot of economic pain. And it's why they are responding with these threats. And when we stand firm with our deterrence, that's the best way to push Iran back to the negotiating table. If there's any hope for that, and I'm not sure there's much, it's by maintaining the strong level of these sanctions and the deterrence that goes along with it.
Well, the president says he's waiting to take their call if they make it. So in the meantime, Daniel Hoffman, thank you for stopping in.
Thank you.
Good to see you. All right, next, you're going to hear directly from someone who was actually in that classified Iran briefing today. The Senate Majority Whip, Senator John Thune, is next. Is there new reason for optimism tonight? Well, 3 top administration officials are saying that recent saber rattling in the Middle East is all about deterrence, certainly not about provoking war with Iran. Well, we've got a lot of other topics possible. Impeachment, debt ceiling negotiations, a trade war with China, and the uncertain status of the USMCA trade deal. So let's dig a little deeper with Senate Majority Whip John Thune of South Dakota. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thanks, Shannon. Nice to be with you.
Okay, so you were part of this briefing today. What did you take from it?
Well, first off, I mean, we had the, kind of the administration team there explaining why they reacted the way that they did, and they had good reason. They're a credible threat, specific threat, and I thought that they did a good job of laying out why we are doing what we are doing, why we've taken the actions we've taken, and I think we have to be prepared. This is an area of the world, of course, as we know, that's very volatile, but also very dangerous, and we have to protect American troops and American interests in that area.
Okay, so Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, first of all, before the briefing, tweeted this yesterday. I'm listening to Republicans twist the Iran intel to make it sound like Iran is taking unprovoked offensive measures against the U.S. and our allies, like it just came out of nowhere. I've read the intel, too, and let me be clear, that is not what the intel says. Today, after the briefing, very similar comments by him that he says, listen, the strategy is not working.
Well, I don't know what those guys are seeing, but there are a lot of people who are sort of in the blame America crowd when it comes to these issues. It's always America's fault. We all know what Iran does. They are the world's largest state sponsor of terror, and obviously are always exercising malign influence in that region of the world. And these were credible, specific threats that our intelligence community and our national security team responded to.
Why do you
they needed to do that.
Why do you think they come out of the same briefing and have such a different reaction?
I think they have a very different view of the world, and I think in a lot of ways the Democrats, particularly in the Senate and those who were there at the time, are very wedded to the Iranian nuclear deal, and I think they actually feel like somehow we can make peace and everything will be all hunky-dory with Iran, and that's not the case. And I think what Iran needs to know, they understand one thing, and that's force. And what our military is projecting there is a deterrent, so that Iran won't undertake any bad behavior. But I think that obviously there are different people, and part of it too, honestly, is Trump derangement syndrome. A lot of people just don't like the president and anything that he does. And I think that his team in this case is reacting in a way that protects American troops, American interests. And Iran needs to understand that if they harm or injure one American soldier, they're going to pay a price.
Okay, I have a couple topics I definitely want to get to, not a ton of time, but let's start with this idea of negotiating over the debt ceiling budgets, where we go from here. The top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, saying essentially the last government shutdown was bad for the Republicans, it was bad for the White House, and that's why you guys are so serious this time around to get something done, because it doesn't benefit you if that happens.
Well, the shutdown previous to that got blamed on Chuck Schumer. It was called the Schumer shutdown, if you recall. I don't think anybody wins in a shutdown, and it's in everybody's interest to get a deal. In talking to the Democrat leaders, I think they sincerely would like to strike a deal on the budget. And honestly, from our standpoint, if we don't get a deal, if we have to go back to the sequester, to the caps that were in place before, it's a $71 billion cut in defense. And most Republicans believe, especially right now, that we need to be taking care of America's vital national security interests. So it's in our interest to get a deal. I think it's in the Democrats' interest to get a deal. And honestly, right now, it's not like the Democrats are irrelevant. They control the House. Obviously, anything that we pass is going to have to go through there. And so I hope that we can find some common ground, at least on this, and have a normal budget process this year.
Well, now, something that Senator Schumer does have in common with the president and with the White House is he wants them to be tough on China. Where do we stand now? I mean, you've got a strong ag community in your home state. There are a lot of people worried about these tariffs. I mean, steel and aluminum lifted on Mexico and Canada. As we're ramping them up on China, where do we go from here?
Well, that was a big development that they lifted the tariffs on steel and aluminum with respect to Canada and Mexico. It will clear the way for passage, at least in the Senate and hopefully in the House, of the USMCA, which is really important for farm country, too. But China's our big market. I mean, in South Dakota, about 2/3 of our soybeans go to the Chinese market. The ag economy is in the tank right now. But I also know that our farmers believe that this president, for the first time in a very, very long time, is taking seriously and confronting all the trade abuses and illegal trade behavior that we've had to deal with, from the Chinese going back decades. So I think they support the objectives. They're hoping that they'll be able to get to a deal quickly. I think the president and his team believe they have maximum leverage right now to get a deal, and I hope that they're right.
Well, it sounds like the Chinese are willing to continue talks, so we'll see.
Right.
Senator, thank you for coming in. Great to have you.
Good to be with you. Thanks, Shannon.